Well, thank you, and it's an honor to be here and spend a little bit of time with all of you this afternoon. I did want to talk a bit about multidimensional leadership in these volatile times, and maybe offer a thought at the end of that of if we do lead into leadership, given all that's going on, what could some of the impact on the world be? And so I'd start with the times that we're in, and maybe one of the best ways to do it is to do a bit of a comparison to some of the last downturns that we've had. And if we look at the 01, 02 downturn and the 08, 09 financial crisis, those were very severe, but they were also acute. We knew in 01 and 02 that we were looking at a dot-com crash. We knew in 08, 09 it was a financial crisis. So severe, but acute. And if you look at the times we're in now, what you end up seeing is that we're much more multi-factor, and it's much more uncertain in terms of the duration. And I'd highlight just a few of the things that we do see going on around us. If we think about geopolitical tensions, the war in Ukraine, increasing US-China tension, escalation of conflict here in the region, it's putting stress on our system. At the same time, our system is more interconnected than ever. Trade as a percentage of GDP has doubled in the last 30 years. Services has doubled on top of that. And trade in data has grown tenfold. So we're hyper-connected, and no region is an island. Every region depends on at least 25% of their economy on imports and exports. The US-China trade route is the largest bilateral trade route in the world. Equally, China needs Brazil to feed itself and needs Australia to drive its industries. So we're all connected. Complicated problem. Demographics. We're facing the biggest change in demographics we've seen since census was recorded. Why? In China and Europe alone, we will lose 230 million workers over the next 30 years. And the only place that makes up that difference is Africa. India peaks out in the next decade, LATAM about the same. Only Africa is young enough to solve that. How do you solve that massive supply-demand balance? Another really complicated existential problem. Climate energy, one I know we've spent a lot of time on. Up until last year, I think we were on a path that says, look, we need to do more on transition, and energy is also affordable. Okay, well, we can do those two things. Well, then security came into play. And now we have to solve all three at the same time. We need energy that is secure, more resilient, but it also has to be affordable. Changes are incredibly regressive in society, and we need to solve the transition. How do we solve all three? And finally, on technology change, we're going to spend a lot of time on generative AI over these few days. There's a massive unlock occurring at a pace that we've never seen before. We did some estimates in our Global Institute that shows $4 trillion of economic value just in 63 specific industry use cases from the current version of generative AI. So you get very excited about that. But equally, we've done work that says 40% of today's workforce needs to be reskilled to take advantage of that opportunity. Further, the return on that reskilling is shortening. It used to be you got about a 5-year return by upskilling a worker. That's actually shrunk to about 2.5 years. So we're on a reskilling treadmill if we want to take advantage of these technologies. So we got a lot of things going on at the same time with uncertain duration. What does that then imply for this notion of multidimensional leadership? And we did some work on CEO excellence, where we looked at the 200 best CEOs in the 21st century. And the criteria were you needed to lead a large publicly traded company for more than 6 years, have outsized returns, have demonstrated social impact, and have unrivaled ethics. That was kind of the solution set. And we came up with a lot of interesting findings from leadership on this, but today I'm going to highlight 2. And I'm going to focus on the aspects of resilience and being mission-driven. And let me talk about each of those. The first is the notion of leaders need to be resilient in these times. And so you may ask me, what does that mean? In simple terms, I like sports. It's the ability to play offense and defense at the same time, to stay in balance. Companies that play too much defense have the ability to survive future shocks, but they come out average in terms of their performance. Too conservative. Companies that only play offense may outstrip all their rivals, but you might also blow up. Too risky. For those companies that find the balance, we found you can outperform by 50% in terms of total shareholder returns. Are you in balance? Can you play offense and defense at the same time? Equally, can you take a broad definition of resilience? Not only resilience in your company, but resilience across your value chain, the interface with your suppliers and with your customers, and the notion of resilience at the individual level. Are you teaching your employees how to get back up when they get knocked down? Personal resilience. So investing at resilience at all these different levels. Maybe finally the aspect is resilience isn't something you do once. It's more like a muscle that you build, and it can get stronger over time as you use it. But if you don't keep coming back to it, it can atrophy. Maybe one notion of leadership is this notion of resilience in these times. The second is being mission-driven. And this is linking your company's goal to an impact that's broader than financial returns, but making sure that that aspiration ties to financial returns. And we've shown that companies that are mission-driven, that leaders that adopt this, outperform those who don't. I'll give some examples. So CVS in the US made a massive pivot to focus on health of their customers. They got out of tobacco, they changed product assortment to be much healthier, and in the process, enabled themselves to drive a much more profitable segment. They've doubled revenues over this period in a very short period of time. If you look at Adidas, Adidas was struggling for quite a while and made a notion that says, look, we're going to focus on helping athletes reach their full potential. And instead of reducing costs, invested in R&D, invested in product development, what it allowed is to go after the highest end segment in the athletic space, and their market cap has grown 10 times as a result of this. And maybe an example from Brazil that I love, Bruno Ferrari started a company called Grupo Oncoclínicos. He was a cancer doctor who had studied at MD Anderson, came back to northern Brazil and said, look, I want everyone to get the best quality care no matter what their means are. And I want them to get the best quality cancer care. He started with one clinic with 6 seats in it in 2010. Today, that's 135 clinics treating over 600,000 Brazilians. They get the same quality of care as you'd get at any of the best research institutions around the world. He's expanding that to the Gulf states next. So this notion of being mission-driven can actually drive outsized returns. So if you embrace those two, let me take one last thing to say, well, what could we do with this in terms of impact on the world? Right? And I want to tee up one powerful notion, which is I think we could have a bolder aspiration, moving from saying, how do we get everybody above the poverty line, to can we get everybody above the empowerment line? Now you might say, what's the empowerment line? So in the B20 last month, we published a report defining the empowerment line. The empowerment line is the minimum level you need to have access to health, education, housing, transportation, and a little bit of reserve that allows you to survive a shock. Right? That's what it's defined as. Now, why does this matter? And 2/3 of the world today, this is the downside, 2/3 of the world today are below that empowerment line. So why does it matter? Well, quite simply, it changes our aspiration level and moves us from thinking about a world where we focus on people surviving to people having a shot. Empowerment gives you the option to have social mobility, right? And so this is an aspiration to say, do we want everyone to have a shot in life? So you kind of say, okay, that's good. Well, what would it cost? Another downside is it would cost a lot. We estimated this, and it's about $37 trillion to close this gap. 80% occurring in the developing world, but 20% in the developed world itself. So it's a massive number. Now, why do I tee this up? Because I'd like to frame then the question of, well, what can business leaders in particular do today by embracing this notion of resilience and being mission-driven? How much can business leaders close this $37 trillion gap? Right? How much can we close the gap? And the answer is, business leaders today can close about 2/3 of this empowerment gap worldwide. Right? 2/3 of this empowerment gap worldwide can be closed by business leaders, focusing on growth primarily in markets that have been underserved and by focusing on the reskilling challenge that I talked to. If we stay true to those two things, we can shift 2/3 of the world from not having a shot to 2/3 of the world having a shot. That's at least a world that I'd like to live in, and I hope you would too. So thanks for indulging me. Resilience and mission-driven, maybe two thoughts in a multidimensional leadership world. Thank you.